welcome back to the Down to the Wire podcast. Wow, British Grand Prix, spicy. A lot of things happening this weekend. As we've said before, Jack is normally the notes master, but purely because there was so much happening, I had to get a load of stuff down, just so I could remember everything. With everything that happened in the race itself, it's easy to forget what happened in qualifying, both traditional and sprint. So we're going to be tearing it all apart in this podcast. It's been a little while, Jack. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. There's not a lot of sport on at the moment, so in a bit of a lull, but I'm divulging myself in my fantasy football because I really enjoy that. And but in terms of mood coming from that race, I'll be honest. I'm not the biggest Lewis Hamilton fan, so this taste has left a bit of a sour one in my mouth. But it was an interesting race.
Yeah. Well, we'll get onto that. But before we get to the race itself, there's a lot to, as I said, there's a lot to dissect. As obviously we had the very first sprint race, and here's a little fact for you. This may make you feel a little bit better. That Max Verstappen, spoiler alert by the way, if you don't know what happened in the British Grand Prix, you probably want to...
Why are you listening, firstly?
Yeah, firstly, why are you listening? Go and watch that. Well, I mean, who knows? Perhaps people haven't got time to sit and watch the whole race, and they think, we'll get a unbiased and objective, description from both of the Jacks. But, Max Verstappen is the first Formula 1 driver in history to score a point without finishing the race.
That's a good point.
That's a good.
That's really smart. That's really good. I like it. That is so going in a quiz. Only Formula 1 driver ever to score a point without actually finishing.
And get a
DNF. You could in theory score points without finishing races before, but you'd only be able to do it if at least 11 drivers crashed out.
Basically,
and you didn't finish, but you were on the final lap when you crashed out.
Yeah.
So very, very minute chance that
slim
happened.
margins.
But there was a chance before, at least.
Yeah. As you said, if you're a Red Bull fan, bit of a bitter taste in the mouth. If you're a Mercedes fan or a Lewis Hamilton fan, then perhaps you're a little bit more happy. It's very split in terms of what happened with that incident, but we'll get onto that later. We'll talk about qualifying first. We'll go in order of what happened. So we'll go Friday, Saturday, Sunday, obviously. So just for context, if you hadn't been following Formula 1 particularly recently, they've introduced a sprint. Now, this is a weird thing. Like, in the commentary, they kept saying how the FIA didn't want to call it a race. I don't get why, because it was very clearly a race. So we had qualifying, as has always been qualifying, Q1, Q2, Q3, and wherever you qualify. That was how you started for the sprint race. And then there was a sprint race that lasted 17 laps. And wherever you finished after that 17 laps is where you started for the actual race, or the feature race is what they call it in the Formula 2. So we'll start off with normal qualifying, shall we?
Let's do so.
Okay, let's do that. So we'll just go straight in there with the time. Well, I say the times, the positions. So 1, 2, 3 was Hamilton, followed by Verstappen, followed by Bottas. Pretty. Hamilton on his final run was purple in both sectors, and then he dropped it in the final sector, didn't he? So there was the potential. I think by that point, Verstappen had done a yellow in his first sector, though, so I think it was always looking likely that that Hamilton was still going to keep pole. I was about to say pole, but it's not really. It's kind of first for the sprint race. Mm-hmm. So Hamilton finished first, followed by Verstappen, followed by Bottas. I guess notable performances then. George Russell. What a performance from him. I don't know about you, but finished 8th.
Yeah, if anything, it was kind of like, it wasn't his first. Last week was his first. Not last week, it was probably 2 weeks before that in Austria. You know what I mean? That was the miracle where he finishes in the top 10, and I think he was 10th. I don't know if he improved on that in Q3, but in this race, qualifying, he finished 8th, and in the Williams, remarkably well.
Well, and the thing is as well that caught me out. He was like less than a tenth behind Perez.
Yeah, to be fair, the margin between first and last, well, maybe not last, first and the next person after Haas is actually quite small this season compared to what is typical. Where when you've seen Mercedes drive away with almost a second on some teams in qualifying, but yeah, it is getting much smaller. And it's nice to see Williams not be the sort of dog of the circuit, and they're actually they're not in the midfield battle, but they're at least competitive with teams like Alfa Romeo.
Well, I mean,
to some degree, Aston Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether perhaps there's to a certain extent Russell is outperforming the car. But I would say
100%.
Well, yeah, yeah. Sorry, that was a bit of a dull statement. It's quite clear that George Russell is outperforming that car. Quality content from this podcast. I would say that on their day, Williams seem to have. They seem to have in qualifying at very least. They seem to have a car that is very quick. Like, well, when I say very quick relative to where they have been, as in, like, let's not forget, like, at the moment, Haas are the whipping boys, right?
Yeah.
But Haas have quite clearly come out and said, look, we're focusing on next season. That's what we're looking at. There have been times where Williams have been that far behind, trying their very best in the current season. So to get into the top 10 is an amazing achievement, and even that close to kind of one of the Red Bulls is also a fantastic achievement, I think. Particularly at his home Grand Prix as well. George Russell, he must have been delighted with that.
Yeah, I mean, and you can see Latifi's not a Formula 1 quality driver. He's there because he's paying for his seat. I mean, there's no hiding that fact, but he's still a half decent one. I mean, I think we said previously when talking about Mazepin that he really is a gulf below what everybody else is, because I don't think he'd even had a top 3 finish in Formula 2. So it's like, yeah, he 100% is buying them. But Latifi is like, he's had some decent finishes in Formula 2 at the very least. And you could just, the difference between him and Russell is astronomical. It's like, it is that impressive what George Russell is doing right now that it's an amazement that he hasn't been put in that Mercedes yet, because he is just driving the wheels off that car. For the time being. Do you think the sort of gap between, I was going to say Williams, but more so Russell and the remainders, is only going to get smaller and smaller as you've seen other teams like Ferrari and to some degree Mercedes sort of hint that they're more looking towards next year than this year, so they're not investing as much this year. But with Williams sort of just going at it again and again and again, week after week, improving, do you think at some point, you're almost looking top 6, or do you think that is just beyond the realms of what is capable?
I mean, the biggest problem for Williams is that they don't seem to be able to convert qualifying pace to race pace. Yeah. I mean, I think until they manage to do that, I don't think it matters how quickly they can be in qualifying. They're never going to compete properly in a race. I mean, look, if they carry on in this trajectory, I mean, I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that, they're kind of in the same sort of realm as Aston Martin, maybe even Alpine, if they can really turn it on, I mean, I guess it's at that point then you're probably going to start questioning. I mean, I guess the difficult thing for Williams is that they must know that the time that they have Russell for is finite. And like you said, Latifi is not really been vintage, is he? So I think when we'll really see where Williams are at is when Russell eventually leaves. I think that'll be next season. Personally, I think they'll do the swap. Well, I say the swap. I think Russell will end up at Mercedes. Up until probably 2 races ago, I was still sceptical, but I think George Russell is not in race, but I think just on outright pace in qualifying is demonstrating that if you put him in one of the fastest cars, he's going to get you a lot of points.
Can I, just on the sort of counter to that, whilst I've been quite vehemently not in favour of Bottas keeping a seat at Mercedes, I will say that the more you see Perez struggle, the more you sort of do just get a little bit of appreciation of, even though if Perez is driving as he should, he beats Bottas, Bottas just always is
consistent.
third, fourth, or fifth. I
This
know
is what I mean.
he had a bit of a blip
Yeah.
in the early part of the season, but by and large, he is just keeping it on the track. He's not
100%.
contending, but
I mean,
he's
look,
alive.
This is the thing. This is always the thing I've said about Bottas. He's not like for example, last season. We'll rule out this season for now because Red Bull are like a lot more competitive and probably the better team so far this season. If you look at last season where Mercedes were just completely dominant, Valtteri Bottas, at the very least, was finishing third.
Mm-hmm.
From your second driver, and look, Mercedes will say all they want, oh, we don't have a first and second driver. They do have a first and second driver. Anyone who is a 7-time Formula 1 world champion is a first driver, right? If they can't ask for much more than that, ultimately. And like you said, perhaps now that, as you say, I think Perez on his day is probably quicker than Bottas. But it's when he's not on his day that you really start to see the difference. Mm-hmm. I think the problem that Bottas has got is that the gap between himself and Lewis this season has been enormous. So I think what you're seeing now is that whereas last season, clearly Mercedes had the best car last season by a distance, so it didn't really matter how well Hamilton was performing or how well Bottas was performing. Ultimately, they were always going to be at the top. Now you're seeing Hamilton is managing to drive the absolute socks off a more limited car. I'm not going to say completely limited because it's still a quick car, but as in a more limited car than they've had in the past. And Bottas just doesn't seem to be able to quite reach that level. And I think
it seems like the ceiling for Bottas is much lower than what it is for Perez, but the floor for Bottas is much higher than what the floor is for Perez, because Perez does seem to have more downs, but when he's up, he's way up.
Yeah.
Whilst with Bottas, he doesn't seem to have loads of downs, but he never gets that high. Yeah.
He's consistent. I mean, the problem that Mercedes have got, though, is that the longer they leave, not having George Russell, I mean, all it would take, for example, I'm just plucking this out of thin air, all it would take, for example, is for, say, next season, at the start of the season, Fernando Alonso to go, do you know what? I've had my time in Formula 1, after this season I'm done, and Alpine to go, right, we'll have George Russell.
Well, Red Bull apparently flirted. Russell said before the British Grand Prix that he wouldn't be opposed to go into Red Bull. I thought that was quite interesting. It's like, you guys, I may really want to drive for Mercedes, but if you aren't going to... at the end of the day, a Formula 1 driver's career is only for a small period of time.
Yeah. Oh, they're not going to hang around.
You're only going to have the best car for a small period. Like, who's to say Mercedes are even the best manufacturer or whatever the term is next year when the regulations change? So you know what I mean? It's like, if you want Russell, get him in whilst it's all good, looking good, so that he stays.
Ultimately, they have got to start looking to the future because Hamilton's not getting any younger. So I think that'll be why they make the change, personally. Should we move on to some... I feel like we've gone on a solid tangent there, to be honest, on George Russell. But Russell on
just one last thing on Russell.
Go on.
Is it was almost a spine-tingling moment watching him go for his Q3 lap. Just nobody on the track, Russell on his own, doing what he can, getting a red... it wasn't a 10th, it was an 8th or 7th, I think, at that point. And it was just the whole crowd cheering him on as he went around. I thought, yeah, you made it, son. It was a good moment.
Yeah, and it was just very impressive, wasn't it? And he's got quite you got a very smooth driving style, George Russell. As in, like you see some drivers and they kind of wrestle in the car into the turns. George Russell, like if you watch the lap from his cockpit, he makes one movement per corner. He never adjusts. It's like he literally turns in and then just holds it there. It's really interesting to watch.
Fair.
Next notable performer then, it's your boy Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, I do like Leclerc. He's my favourite driver. It's something about him that screams Ferrari. He is Ferrari. Ferrari's just, it's all panache. But yeah, solid performance by him. He just, in a sense, did what he needed to do. I think sort of, if one of the Red Bulls or Mercedes don't finish in the top 4, then, you know what I mean? All you're looking for is who's going to be next up. Is it going to be a McLaren? Is it going to be a Ferrari? And Leclerc, more often than not, has said, I'll be that number 4. If you want me to be that number 4,
I mean,
I'll be him, and he's done it again.
Yeah, I mean, so he qualified 4th, which is an excellent result. Like you say, I think a lot of the time this season, and I've certainly been guilty of it, is in my head, I think if it's not, if one of the Mercedes or Red Bull doesn't finish, in my head I automatically think, right, Lando Norris for podium. But when you look at it on the balance, Charles Leclerc probably should enter your thinking more often than he does, perhaps just because Ferrari have been... Well, they've been a little bit up and down. They've been much better than they were last season. There's no doubt about that. But they have been a little bit up and down, topsy-turvy.
But that was Leclerc's first podium of the season, and by and large, I thought he's had a pretty good season. I just didn't even acknowledge that. You know what I mean? You consider how good he was in Monaco, and then doesn't actually start the race. He's had some rotten luck on some occasions, and you think Azerbaijan, he was pipped to the podium by Gasly on that sort of 3-lap bonanza. So he's been a bit unfortunate, and interestingly, on the Lando Norris point, that I think he's the only driver now to have finished in the points for every race so far.
Is he?
So talk about consistency.
Another little stat there. Yeah, and I mean, I think if you look relative to the car that they're driving, I think you'd probably have to argue that Leclerc's probably been one of the better performers. As in, at the start of the season, if you'd said that Ferrari would get a podium, you'd be like, yeah, right. That's not happening. So yeah, Charles Leclerc had a good qualifying and a very good race, but we'll get onto that a little bit later. But the most notable performance of them all for me, and not necessarily because it was the best, but because
I was going to say this is more of a congratulations, you've graduated to the big boy table.
Finally, it happened. Danny Ricciardo qualified 7th. He got into Q3. Very a much needed performance for Danny Rick. I think he's in I feel like it's got worse in recent weeks. I think one of them he qualified 13th. You're like, oh my goodness.
He never put himself on. He always seemed to have decent races where he'd improve by 4 or 5 positions every time. But
because
he could just never he could never get that solid standing just to start the Grand Prix in a good position. So very decent for him to start in 7th.
Yeah, and I think I'm right in saying he finished well in Austria or Styria, whichever one it was. He finished quite well, so I feel like he's starting to kind of get a little bit more comfortable with the car. And I think, like we said, the problem hasn't necessarily been his race pace, but because he's been so diabolical in qualifying, he's left himself with a huge amount to do in races. So notable performance for Mr. Ricciardo in qualifying. Do we want to add anything else for traditional qualifying, or should we move on to the sprint race?
No, sort of covered it well.
Okay, cool. Before we get on to the specifics of this sprint race, what are your thoughts on the concept? No, let me put it this way. What were your thoughts on the concept of a sprint race before Saturday?
If I'm honest, before Saturday, I was all for it. I just thought practice is boring. I've spoken to you in the past and you've said you don't even watch practice, which is fair enough. I tend to just chuck it on whilst I'm working. But
yeah, I mean, when I say I don't watch it, I don't. If it's on,
it's not an interesting.
And I can. Watch. Yeah, if it's on, I can. If I can't,
it's like listening to the
I'm
radio.
Yeah.
It's background noise, but before the sprint race, before the weekend, I thought, great, more racing. What's not to like? That's my initial thoughts. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was a little bit sceptical, just from the point of view that it like I said, not completely against the idea, but I think apart from just adding more racing in, I'm not sure what it really adds. And I know that sounds a bit of a stupid statement because you kind of sat there like, oh, well, surely you want more racing. Yes, as long as it's not at the detriment of traditional qualifying and the race itself.
On that point about the detriment to traditional qualifying, interestingly, the person who gets accredited with the pole position for the race is the person who won the sprint qualifying, not the person who finished with the fastest time in traditional qualifying, which, I'll be honest, don't agree with that at all. You're quickest for one lap. That's not, you know what I mean? This is a race. That's different.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess this is where it kind of, because in the notes we've got thoughts on the concept before Saturday and thoughts on the concept after the sprint race on Saturday. So, yeah, I mean, having watched the sprint race, I mean, my to summarise, it just felt really gimmicky. That's how I felt. It mixed up the midfield a fair bit. Like Fernando Alonso had that absolute, he just went on a complete mission, didn't he? The top of the field stayed roughly the same. I mean, we've got the grids here. So obviously, Verstappen absolutely rinsed Hamilton on the start.
Well, I say fast start. That was insane.
I say he rinsed Hamilton. He did, but it was a combo of Verstappen had a very, very good start, and Hamilton had a very, very bad start. So it was like both extremes. So those two swapped around. Bottas and Leclerc stayed in the same position. Perez, who qualified 5th on the Friday, dropped out. Did he have a DNF? Or did he just drop right to the back?
I believe... I believe he didn't have a DNF. I think he started... Well, he qualified something like 17th or 18th, and then they decided just do a load of upgrades to the car and chuck him in the pit, because what's the difference?
So Danny Ricciardo then got promoted to 6th. And then the first one of those then ultimately that really moved up the pecking order was Fernando Alonso. So he jumped from 11th to 7th. So a lot of the kind of top 6 really didn't change that much. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, my ultimate feeling was it was a bit gimmicky. It 100% devalued the feeling of qualifying, traditional qualifying, is how I feel, as in, just completely redundant. And I don't know about you, but I feel like it reduced my excitement for the race the following day.
Do I think that? I don't know if it reduced my excitement, but in a sense, you already kind of knew what was going to happen, what the storyline would have been. Had Hamilton not taken out Verstappen would have won that race, and we know that because of how fast he was. Yeah, no, I just do that. Just leave it as a sweeping
statement.
But we're not undenying that Verstappen would have won the race had he not been, had he not crashed out. I don't think that's within a shadow of a doubt. He absolutely flew past. And I know Hamilton had a bad start, but I mean, Verstappen was close to 4 or 5 seconds ahead after just 17 laps. It was it was a golf.
It's easy to say that though, but as in you don't know how. As in it's easy to say, oh, Verstappen would have gone on to win it. You don't know that, as in if they hadn't have collided, like Hamilton was very much over the back of Verstappen for the majority of that first lap until they collided. It's one of those things where anything can happen.
And I feel this now. I feel like the reason Hamilton was so over the back of him was because he knew what would have happened if the race had proceeded in its normal procession. I think he saw how quick Verstappen was the day before and went, I've got to do something. My strategy now changes from, instead of just surviving for the first lap and then, seeing where we go, because clearly I can't make up the gap on him lap on lap. Instead, I'll just... take more risks on the first lap. But that's what I mean. I think my post-sprint race reflection or post-weekend reflection is that all it does, by and large, is sort of strip out the randomness of qualifying by letting a lot of those sort of midfield guys find their natural order over the first, over that 17 laps. And then it kind of just kills a little bit of that, whoa, this guy's out of position. Because even though Alonso had a really bizarre 5-place gain, that was on one lap, and that's not as a result of a sprint qualifying. That is as a result of the fact that he took a load of risks on that first lap. So I don't think it really added anything on that element. But also it's sort of that took up the element of risk in terms of strategies. It's like people have gone, let's see how far we can stretch this tyre. Let's see what happens if we try this or that at the beginning. And it's like, well, now that you sort of take a lot of that away and everybody knows what the sort of order is going to happen going into the race, I think some guys went, okay, watch out for Alonso. We know where he's going to overtake. We can block him off in these particular areas. Hamilton may have, as I was saying, looked at Verstappen and said, Verstappen's quicker than me. And even though I was quicker in qualifying, clearly I couldn't do that for every lap of this race. And he went, I'm going to be ultra aggressive for this first lap just to see if I can. Because I think that's what I mean. You looked at some maybe races last year. You think of maybe when Perez won in Bahrain. It's like, had he not known he could keep those tyres going for that long, maybe he doesn't try that strategy. In a sense, you're learning a lot more information in that sprint race
100%.
Going into the actual race. Then it kills a lot of that risk of, can we do this? Can we do that? You know what I mean? What's the point in having these departments that work out how long that tyre's going to last if you already
find out?
You go back to Silverstone last year. The tyres exploded on the dot of what that whatever the limit was. It's like,
Pirelli,
going into this year, it's like, had they known that, who knows? Maybe Sainz, Bottas, Hamilton all pit the lap before because they know that's going to happen.
And then it changes the order. Yeah, no, that's a very good point.
So it takes away that risk.
It takes away the randomness of, or the variables, I guess. It kind of eliminates a lot of those. And I think I can see why they do it in the F2 because obviously they are pretty much the same
for a lot
cars.
more points as well in the F2.
Yeah, in the F2 they can change the. I think it's something to do with the ECU, so they can change how the car responds, the throttle response, etc., etc. But ultimately, the cars are pretty much the same. So that is slightly different. But yeah, the way I see it is this: if they're going to do it for, like random races, because I think they've got 3 on the cards at the moment, haven't they? They've got this one. Didn't you say potentially Brazil and another one? And
Monza. Monza's 100%.
Monza. Yeah.
Brazil's 50-50 depending on if Brazil actually goes ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, it was that if they do that, I'm kind of still a bit jury's out because I don't like the way that it kind of makes qualifying. When I say qualifying, I mean like traditional qualifying just completely redundant. And I don't know about you, but this is going to sound really dramatic and theatrical, but there's something like really gladiatorial about traditional qualifying that I absolutely love. It's just so simple. It's like car, machine, track, as fast as you can, go.
It's effective.
It's as simple as that.
If you're going to add anything in, I'm going to go back to my point about Monaco, where I think they chuck in time trials. I think time trials is a much more exciting thing to put on than a sprint qualification, which is just by and large a short race. You put a time trial in, all of a sudden it's like, right, you got 3 laps, we're going to take your best aggregate time. It's like, whoa, here we go. That's even if you replace normal qualification with that for 1 or 2 races of the year, just if they want these just to try out different things. But yeah, I don't like the idea. If anything, I'm not for sprint races than normal races. I don't think it adds anything.
No. So I'm kind of in the position where I'm jury's out if they're going to do it on a handful. I certainly don't want it at every race like they do in the F2. I really don't want that. I think generally... Sorry, go on.
Instead of a 17-lapper, to be fair, it was a 100-kilometre race, which just worked out as a 17-lapper at Silverstone. I'd much rather see 3 5-lap races. I know it sounds really radical, but just go at it 5 laps. Okay, stopped. 5 laps. Stopped. You know, it's just because the best part of the race is the start. So why not just get loads of starts in just for the chaos? That's what I want to see.
Fair enough. In terms of I guess just to summarise then, Verstappen moved from second to pole. Biggest loser was obviously Sergio Perez because he had a spin, didn't he, and as a result took damage and meant he had to start from the pit lane for the actual race. Fernando Alonso was probably the biggest winner, kind of just going all out on the first lap and gaining 5 spaces. Carlos Sainz lost out a bit as well, dropped a couple of places. And then it was just a bit of a mix around in the midfield to rear of the order, nothing major. Anyway, right, let's talk about the race. We'll start at the start. Lap 1, the incident. If you had to summarise it in one word, how would you summarise it? I haven't got this in the notes, but I just want to know why you'd summarise it.
Bold. Nah, to be honest, I can't really summarise that in one word. But if I were just to make a quick one sentence as to what my thoughts coming away from that incident was, I'd say I'm all for aggressive racing, but there's an attacker and a defender in every move. And if there's an incident, I think they should more harshly penalise the attacker, because I think it should be the attacker's responsibility not to make an accident cause that. And I'm not just saying this because it's Hamilton. I think this should go across for all races. If there's two people battling, but one of them's the attacker quite clearly because they're the one who's perhaps gambling, maybe not gambling a touch more, but being the person who has to make the move. If you're the one making the move, you've got to make the move safely rather than the defender having to be uber conscious of the safety element. I just think it's on the attacker's emphasis not to cause an incident, because in a sense they're choosing when they're going to attack. Don't attack in a scenario where something could happen, like we saw. That's my overarching opinion coming from this weekend.
That's a long sentence, mate. I'm just saying that is a long sentence. So yes, it's a what do they call it at the start of a dissertation?
I hate that you asked that because I would have found that earlier. But I'll think about it whilst you express your opinions.
It's whatever that is. My summary would be feisty.
That's fair enough.
Yeah,
it was very feisty.
it was very feisty. So basically, if you didn't know, Hamilton and Verstappen collided. I don't know about you, Jack, but it's been coming. It was going to happen at some point during the season, and it has finally happened. Up until that point, it had been brilliant racing. So yeah, Hamilton had been kind of fairly close to Verstappen for the majority of the lap.
Yeah, to be honest, he looked more punchy. He did look more punchy. I don't know if they powered him right up for that first lap just to see if they can get him ahead.
And this is interesting, going back to the sprint race. And Damon Hill made this point on the F1 commentary. Like, he said how he was of the opinion that the sprint race had that's not the right word, but it had basically G'd Hamilton up to kind of be like, all right, okay, Verstappen's like gone and done that in the sprint race, I'm going to try and do the same in the normal race, which is fine because it's that's part of racing. But yeah, so Hamilton had been kind of very close to Verstappen for the majority of the first lap. I think that was both a tactical thing, like you said. I think he was probably of the opinion that if ever he was going to catch Verstappen, the best chance would be at the start.
I imagine all of his strategies to win the race were based on you have to get ahead in lap one. I don't think there was any way they could have got it otherwise.
No. And I think there was probably, like we said, the incentive based on what had happened in the sprint race, try and be a bit, be bold going into the first lap. In terms of the incident itself then, so heading into Copse, which is the kind of fast right-hander before you have the sweeping
Maggots and Beckett's.
Left, right of Maggots and Beckett. They kind of had a bit of a joust going on to that straight. So Verstappen had kind of moved to the right to kind of cover off. Hamilton still stuck to the right. Hamilton kind of went up the inside. Verstappen was on the outside, and Hamilton's front left collided with Verstappen's rear right. Verstappen basically lost a tyre and then flew into the wall at something, they said it's something like 51 or 52G.
51, yeah. I was amazed that the British crowd cheered. I thought the man's gone in the 51 Gs, what are we cheering about?
Did they cheer, or was it more of a, ooh?
No, it sounded like a cheer to me. When I was listening to it, I thought, it's a bold thing to cheer about, I thought, as a British public. Another man going down.
I feel like you may be a little bit sceptical there. I don't think the British public are quite as...
I don't know.
As sinister
Classically
as that.
British, I think.
Is it? Okay, there we are. Yeah, so I think that's probably about as unbiased a description as I can give of the incident, really. Would you agree with that? Do you think there's anything there that I've omitted that you think is...
I don't think you've omitted... No, I think... Well, I'll be honest. I'm not going to be biased. My view was that Hamilton is more at fault than Verstappen. I think in every instant there's always somebody who's more or less at fault. I don't think anyone's ever squeaky clean unless...
Blameless, yeah.
Yeah, unless you're thinking maybe back to Vettel against Ocon on the first race of the season where he blamed Ocon for going slow.
Or like an Ayrton Senna who just ploughed into the driver at the first corner with no intent of going around it.
Absolutely, yeah. But,
so...
on this instant in particular, my viewpoint is... I don't think Hamilton was alongside enough. I know there was footage of him or an image where he is alongside, but I think he's only alongside at that moment because he's decided not to brake, and the apex, the angle he's taking, I don't think he's staying on the track firstly, or if he is, he's going to be going insanely slow during the end of that corner, and I think Verstappen was comprehensively ahead enough to have the right to take that corner. I think Hamilton should have pulled out, if I'm honest, even though I can understand the viewpoint of Verstappen may not have known he was there because he thought he'd have pulled out by then, and maybe he should have been more conscious of that, but by and large I think in that situation Hamilton should have backed out a lot earlier than what he did, if he did, that is, and I believe it was Hamilton's fault.
Okay. I mean, just going off from that slightly, I mean, I think ultimately it's probably the most divided I've seen Formula 1 in a long time based on a single incident. In terms of the race itself, Hamilton received a 10-second stop-go penalty, just to kind of emphasise how divisive it was. You had, on the F1 commentary, you had Jenson Button, Damon Hill and Chandok. Jenson Button was of the opinion that it probably should have been harsher. Damon Hill was of the opinion that it could have been harsher, but he thought that 10 seconds was fair. And you had Chandok who was saying that he thought that 10 seconds was harsh. So that just kind of emphasised you've got three different perspectives from three different people.
It was a racing incident.
Yes.
It was a racing incident, but it was a racing incident where you could more side with one than the other. I think that was the brutal element of it.
Yeah, and Horner was raging. Surprise.
No. Marco was asking for a race ban.
Oh, yeah, well, he can get in the bin. So, my opinion is that I just think that it's purely a racing incident. I think that a 10-second stop-go is harsh. And my reasoning is... you said you didn't think Hamilton was far enough alongside to kind of warrant him kind of putting his car where he put his car. I think he possibly was. I would also say that I completely agree with what you're saying in terms of there is it's a balancing act. I think that's completely accurate, as in it's never no one's ever squeaky clean in an incident like that. There's always an argument that drivers could have done more, could have done less. I think it was perhaps a little bit naive on Verstappen's part, purely from the point of view of he was trying to take the fastest line through that corner. Mm-hmm. He would have known not necessarily how far alongside that Hamilton was, but he must have known that Hamilton was in the vicinity, and even if he didn't know for sure, you've got to assume that the car just doesn't vanish. And because I know a lot of people have been saying about Hamilton didn't hit the apex of that corner, which I completely agree with. He didn't hit the apex. However, Verstappen could have given more to the left as well. Yeah,
I'll agree with that. I'll agree. Verstappen probably should. And maybe it is a bit in hindsight, but when you know that Hamilton was alongside you, he's probably not going to have pulled out that much that he's, you know what I mean, to that detriment to his own race.
Which is why I think that it's just a racing incident. That's as far as I think if you are going to give anything, I think a 10-second is probably... I can understand why they gave a 10-second as well, just purely from the point of view that Verstappen's race was done, as in it was over.
If anything, the 10-second was bang on perfect purely because no one was satisfied. Everybody wanted more. Either it was more for one or more as in nothing. I will say...
so it was right down the middle.
it hasn't tarnished the championship battle between the two. It hasn't, because it's still a great battle what's going on. But it does. The penalty never seems enough when one driver's come out of it unscathed in the sense of his car, and the other one is out. Because, I mean, you got to feel for Verstappen, where he's been in Azerbaijan where his tyre blew up, and you can argue that was perhaps some of Red Bull's fault, but they played within the rules. It was just the fact that the rules weren't comprehensive enough, which is why the incident occurred. Same for Aston Martin, that was in that race. So he lost 25 there, which would have been a 10-point gain, maybe even 11-point with the fastest lap over Hamilton on that scenario. And now he's had this one, which is, you could argue, a 32-point loss, because he probably was going to win this race with Hamilton in second with that's another 7 plus the 25. Well, actually, no, that's another 7. Ignore my 25, not 32. It's just a 7.
It's a swing, though, isn't it? It's a swing. Yeah. It's gone from. It's not.
You've got to hope something goes his way.
Yeah.
he's been the recipient of the bad luck so far, and you kind of hoping he find some way of rectifying that. Not saying crash into Hamilton, but
well, I mean. I'd agree with you on that, as in he has been a little bit unlucky. I mean, the one thing I would say is, in relation to Baku, it was horrendously unlucky, naturally. However, if you think about it, so Verstappen was in first, Hamilton was running in second.
Yeah.
Had they just finished the race, Verstappen would have gained 25 points. Hamilton would have gained 18 points. So
was
there's
he
a
second?
plus.
Oh, I thought he was third. Oh, never mind. Okay. No, Hamilton was third. Yeah.
Oh, okay. There we are. Then he was third.
Yeah.
It would have been.
Yeah, that was my 10. Yeah.
What is it? There we go. Yeah. But then, because of the restart, which was caused because Verstappen crashed out, Hamilton had that issue where he went straight on and ended up with nothing.
Yeah.
So
that's what I mean. Like in that one, it kind of helped.
I feel like Baku
lost it, but that was a 10-point loss in a sense.
It is a 10-point loss. It is a 10-point loss. I feel like these sort of things balance themselves out over the course of the season. You know, like ultimately Mercedes are yet to have a failure of a car or anything like that. So I feel like that's going to balance out. I agree with what you're saying in terms of, you know, Red Bull and Verstappen fans are obviously going to call for more, because it's not just the fact that their driver isn't getting anything. It's the fact that Hamilton is. I think it's a tricky one. Ultimately, it is a racing incident. I think it just depends on how much of the blame you apportion to certain drivers. I mean, I think Chandok did a good little summary. I thought, in terms of there've been a handful of times where Verstappen and Hamilton have been kind of alongside each other. And Verstappen is well within his rights, got his elbows out and kind of eased Lewis off the track. I think had Lewis perhaps been a bit more feisty, he could have held position. Then you're looking at perhaps another 2 incidents. I think the ones he showed were Imola and Barcelona. I think in both of those, I don't think, I'm not saying that Verstappen was wrong in those circumstances, but he was aggressive, which is fine.
He was, but can I just, on my side, on the Verstappen viewpoint for those, he is 100% alongside in both of those. Like, he is alongside him going into it, for a couple of seconds. And I think in those ones, that is where you're allowed to battle. There isn't an attacker or defender there. I felt like in this scenario with Britain, in the British one, in that one I thought Hamilton doesn't have as much a right as Verstappen had going on in those 2 incidents. I just feel like there's the amount of how much they were alongside. I mean, Hamilton was there for a snapshot, which was what is the only photo they're showing, whilst for those ones they were alongside going into them, and you could just say that one person had to back out, and you can say maybe
Imola.
Who knows? Yeah.
Imola, I agree with you. Barcelona, I disagree with you, because if you watch
I
Barcelona,
thought more so on the Barca.
No, I disagree with Barcelona. If you watch the Barcelona overtake, Hamilton has to take evasive action to not collide with Verstappen, just because of how Verstappen has got into the corner. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but what I'm saying is, I think if you're going to apply the rule of that's aggressive and that's okay, I feel like you've perhaps got to be. I think it just happens that in this circumstance, because it's ended in a collision, people are trying to apportion blame. Whereas I think in the other ones, because it hasn't ended in a collision, I think they've just gone, oh, well, that's hard racing. So that's my viewpoint on the matter. As you say, I think depending on what viewpoint you take, not everyone's going to agree. I mean, what I don't seem to agree with, and this seems to baffle me, is that people are seeming to suggest that Lewis Hamilton firstly caused the crash on purpose, which that just baffles me. Firstly, is the guy who's chasing the championship. That doesn't make any sense because, and this is another thing as well, which I thought was interesting. Mercedes said, had they not had a red flag, they would have had to have retired the car as well because they had a cracked front rim. So, if they hadn't have had a red flag, Hamilton would have been out as well. So,
but I to be honest, I don't think Hamilton went out there to crash into Lewis.
100.
But I will say that I wouldn't be surprised if he went into that race with the mindset of, I've got less to lose. I'm not saying that he's going to cause a crash, but in a sense, he'd seen from the sprint qualifying race that he can't keep up, and he thought, it's worth me taking the risks because if something does happen, not saying he wanted a 51G crash into the wall, but if something does happen, it's not as a bigger loss to him. Because in a sense, I know they both could have been crashed at the race. And when you're the chaser, you need... But in a sense, looking at it on paper, that was going to be a 7 to 8 point loss for Hamilton that weekend.
Yeah. Oh, look, that's the beauty of Formula 1, isn't it? That's, drivers taking risks and, going for... Ayrton Senna said, if you no longer go for a gap, you're no longer a racing driver. That's part of the sport, isn't it? That's not to say you should just plunge your car into every gap that's possible, but, do
a Maldonado.
Within reason. Yeah, do a Maldonado. Yeah, and I mean, another thing that I don't really seem to understand, well, two things really, is that they seem to be this apportioning of blame on Hamilton, saying that he's dangerous and X, Y, and Z. I'm like, look, with the greatest respect, like, it's Formula 1. It's a dangerous sport. This is part of the parcel. I'm not saying you be flippant and just start plunging your car left, right, and centre. But ultimately, there could be an argument. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. There could be an argument that if Verstappen is a bit more wily, and like Hamilton has had to learn this, there would have been times where Hamilton would go for everything and anything in terms of whether he's in front or behind. But I think now you see with Hamilton, there are times where he thinks, no, I pull my car out and I secure second. And there are times where he thinks, no, I fight for this. And I feel like sometimes Verstappen, because he's so aggressive, and it's good, it's exciting to watch, that's what you want in Formula 1, but I think sometimes it's almost like he goes boom or bust. It's like first or nothing. And I don't understand the, this rhetoric of, it's unsporting that he was celebrating. Like, with the greatest respect, Romain Grosjean was on fire for 10 seconds and was, like, potentially in life-threatening condition, and they still did the podium, which Verstappen was on, by the way. He was on that podium, and they still did the podium as per.
I would say to the contrary, though, that in that scenario, the Grosjean incident was nothing to do with Verstappen, whilst on this one, if you were looking at it, Verstappen saying, you've just crashed me out, in his opinion, and you've just gone on to, celebrating in such an open fashion, it's a little bit of, all right.
That's sport, then. I'm sorry, because Verstappen.
I feel like it's a bit of a kick in the teeth to say, just when you look at it and go, "You've crashed me out," from his opinion, and it's like you've then just gone to sort of rub it in.
Yeah, but
the celebrations.
But they weren't saying it from that perspective. They were saying it from the perspective of, I'm in hospital, and just celebrating while I'm in hospital, which is a load of nonsense. Because firstly, they knew he was relatively all right because he got up out of the car and walked to the ambulance. Secondly, Hamilton, at the time of doing the podium and the celebrations, etc., didn't even know that he'd gone to hospital. So, I feel like that's... I'm not... Look, ultimately, the main thing is that Max Verstappen is okay. That's the main thing. But I think for Verstappen to come out and say, I'm disappointed with Lewis, he shouldn't have been celebrating, like... I don't buy that. Sorry. I think that's part of the sport. That's my opinion on that, anyway. Do we have anything else to say on that incident?
Hamilton's a thug. No, I know nothing. He's a disgrace to the sport. What's he doing? No.
So much salt. Should we move on to the rest of the pack then? If we haven't got
probably
anything else
should.
to say there?
It's about 20 minutes on one lap, and we've got just the 50 or so to go.
Well, this is going to be a 5-hour special. Right, rest of the pack then. Honourable mention. I think the first man is Charles Leclerc. We picked him out for qualifying, but what a drive for Ferrari.
Sort of what a drive, but also what was going on. It was like, right, okay, we've got a factory reset our steering wheel as we're going here, lads, here we go. It's like, okay, what's the next code? Apparently they were just doing it for about 20 minutes straight, just trying to recode that thing.
Yeah, so they said he had some sort of problem. It wasn't a hardware issue, it was something to do with, I can't remember what they said it was now, but
basically, his engine, though, was going slow on certain occasions. He's like, why is it going slow? Why is it going slow?
Cutting out. He kept saying it's cutting out. But despite that, he looked fairly comfortable for the majority of the race, to be honest. Because, I don't know about you. Oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I reckon he might have won that race had Norris not had the slow pit stop. Because if Norris hadn't had that slow pit stop, he stays ahead of Bottas. If he stays ahead of Bottas, Hamilton won't be able to get past both Bottas and Norris in the one moving. I know he did overtake them both, but doing it separately without, you know what I mean? In a sense, he was easily able to pass Bottas because they allowed him to. But had they been closer, DRS might have kept them apart. Who knows what could have happened? But
100%.
Very good drive. Very good drive.
I can't remember what I was going to say now.
Can only apologise.
I was thinking Ferrari, Leclerc
winning.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Because I don't know about you, but when I saw Leclerc was in first, followed by Hamilton, I was like, well, surely it's just a matter of laps before Hamilton just overtakes him and kind of drives off into the distance. But that really wasn't the case. As in, Leclerc properly stuck around to the point where he led every lap until like the last 3, I think.
Yeah, it was quite close.
Yeah, it was heartbreakingly close for Leclerc, really, to be honest. And like you said, he'd managed to kind of manage an issue with the car and still keep a fairly comfortable gap. And like you said, all it would have taken was for Norris to have had that quick stop rather than the and he could have potentially held up Bottas and Hamilton together, because obviously then the logistics of the switchover isn't quite as simple, is it? Fair play to Charles Leclerc. I guess another thing then, McLaren. I think they had a good weekend on the whole, really.
There was a small period where there was questions as to whether Norris might actually win the race. He was in second, I think, ahead of Bottas, and Leclerc was having his engine issues, and they just announced the Hamilton 10-second penalty, and it was like, mate, if all these guys go out, he could have had it, but a poor pit stop meant that Bottas got ahead of him, and no issues for Hamilton or Leclerc, just seemed to, ended up fourth.
I think they were really unfortunate, weren't they, in terms of the pit stop. It seemed to be that a few teams had troubles with slow pit stops, probably because of the heat. I think Sainz was another one who had an absolute stinker of a pit stop.
Just before Leclerc came in as well, it was like that was that way round, because they would have been fuming.
When Charles Leclerc came in, I think everyone was kind of holding their breath, like, oh, don't let him lose the position because of a dodgy pit stop.
Cameraman was straight on that left front tyre, like, go on.
do it. So Norris P4, Ricciardo, albeit some way back, finished P5. And I think, prior to the season, I think Ricciardo probably wouldn't have been particularly happy with that scenario, but given how his season has gone, I think he'll be happy to just get the result, to be honest with you. And I think he'll be happy with the weekend as a whole, like we said earlier, as in he's qualified well in terms of this. He hasn't qualified well. He's qualified poorly and raced okay, but because he's given him so much to do after a poor qualifying session, is meant nothing. Whereas I think this is like one of the first times, maybe one or two other times, but this is one of the first solid full race weekends that Daniel Ricciardo has had. Particularly because we had the sprint race in the middle as well. So, yeah, I think he'll be happy with that. He had a properly interesting battle with Carlos Sainz, I thought. I think Sainz was a little bit unlucky throughout the weekend, really, when you think about it, wasn't he? A little bit unlucky. Lost out in terms of the sprint race, and then had that issue in the pit stop with the wheel kind of playing a bit of havoc. And like you said, I think Norris perhaps would have been hoping for a little bit more at the start of the race when Hamilton had his 10-second penalty. Charles Leclerc was at the front, and you were kind of thinking, "Oh, Lando could get a win, yeah, at his home Grand Prix," but it was undone ultimately by a very slow pit stop, and things didn't quite materialise as he would have hoped, I think. But, you know, that's the way it goes in Formula 1 sometimes. But I think they'll be happy with a P4 and P5. Also for Norris, because he had that issue with the Euro 2020 final, didn't he, where he got mugged or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Sergio Perez. I don't know what you want to say about Sergio Perez, perhaps based on these notes. I mean, it seems to have, you know, we kind of referred to it at the earlier on, in that Perez seems to be a little bit up and down. I feel like it's gone under the radar a little bit. I don't know about you.
Yeah. To be fair, it looks like he can't overtake people. He can manage the life out of a tyre to the nth degree. It's incredible how long he can really just cling on to tyres and get them to extend and extend. But he just doesn't seem to have the pace. I don't know if it's just because of the car and whether the car overheats or it just isn't got a good aerodynamic element to it whenever he's behind another car, and that he just can't get close enough to overtake. But he does not seem, whenever he's behind somebody, he's stuck. And I think that may have even played into his mind when he tried to overtake, I think it was Norris, to get a position during the sprint race, which caused the spin. He's not looked good for a bit. I mean, I was going to say I got some other notes. I haven't. I've got my fantasy football statistics just because I do the F1 fantasy as well. But yeah, he's had low scores for 4 races in a row now. Ever since he's won in Azerbaijan, he's not really had a great race since. I mean, both of the Austria ones he didn't do particularly well in as well. So
no.
It's sort of going under the radar, but at the same time, it depends. He hasn't had that sort of consistency. He's won a race, great, but he's also too often been towards the bottom and not been able to get up and up and up. I mean, there was a point where he was 10th, and they thought it's better for us to pit him and get him on a fresh set of tyres, just to get the fastest lap to stop Hamilton getting that. Because to be fair, net gains, they've gained, well, they haven't gained a point, but they've taken. They're either going to take a point off or they're going to gain a point themselves. I think they thought may as well help Verstappen out on the side. So went for that element. But yeah, he's not been good. He's not been good for a few weeks. No,
I mean, and you said it earlier. Like, I think perhaps what you're seeing is Perez on his day is brilliant, but he does seem to be a little bit volatile, I guess, in that when he doesn't finish in the top 4. He's kind of like not even in the top 10, which I don't know whether that's better than what Red Bull had before. Probably is ultimately, because I think ultimately what they had with Albon is somebody who couldn't finish in the top 4 regardless. But yeah, I think perhaps it's been masked a little bit because he got that win in Baku. He had a good race in Bahrain, didn't he, where he started from the pit lane and managed to get, I think it was like 5th or something. Yeah. So, yeah, he's had a couple of good performances, but I feel like if it keeps going a little bit like this, people may start asking a few questions. I think he's safe, I think. I don't think he's going to lose his seat, but I think, you know...
Well, not this season. I am starting to think... has he got a 1 or a 2-year deal?
I'm not sure, to be honest. Not sure.
If it's only a 1-year deal, I wouldn't be surprised if Helmut Marko's thinking of something else, only because what they wanted from the second driver is someone who can help with the strategy, not have to do something. At the moment, Verstappen's driving away in most races, which means that they haven't had to rely on strategy. But should Mercedes catch up, I think they're going to need Perez to be a little bit more consistent.
Well, yeah, they're back into
or
the
just be more
2v1
consistent
scenario,
than Bottas. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
But to be honest, I was going to talk about Hungary, but we are going to talk about Aston Martin first. But in terms of Perez, I think, looking for consistency. Because if not, I don't think anyone's going to forget that they've still got Pierre Gasly sat in the sister
100%.
team.
Yeah.
George Russell isn't a Mercedes driver; he is a Williams driver.
Yeah.
And there's options out there. Who knows? Nico Hulkenberg, bring back the Hulk.
Hulking back.
Yes.
Fair enough. Finally, then, before we look a little bit forward to Hungary, Aston Martin, formerly the pink Mercedes, and I'm now rephrasing them the green Williams. Maybe a little bit harsh. But yeah, another tough weekend for them. Stroll finished 8th, Vettel with a dump. I don't know, I feel like Aston Martin haven't really kicked on from last season as they would have hoped.
Well, to be honest, what were they going to kick on from? Like, in a sense, I'm trying to think of a good analogy for it, but it's, well, let's think of one on the sea. It's the equivalent of buying a really high grade boat from Mercedes and not having any sailors who know how to operate it or upgrade it or maintain it. And now it's like, well, you've still just got that same boat, but you're not doing anything with it, and you don't know how to maintain it. That's you know what I mean? It's just going.
You're right, though.
Yeah. They don't know what. I'm not going to say they don't know what they're doing, because some weekends they have a great one, particularly when it comes to strategy. But by and large, they're a bit of a non-starter this season.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess it's perhaps drastic as well in that, like there were a few races. Particularly maybe not necessarily races, but in terms of qualifying, there were a few where they outperformed Mercedes, and there were a few where, even if they didn't outperform Mercedes, they gave them a bit of a scare and made them have to really pull out a very quick time to take pole. And they did get a couple of podiums as well. So, but yeah, they just really haven't. I guess when I say kicked on, I just mean in terms of results. They've very much gone backwards. I mean, when I was writing these notes, I was kind of thinking, was doing what they did last season worth it?
Yeah.
Because...
I think it was. I think the costs... Well, I don't think the parts they bought from Mercedes were that expensive. It was just the pure fact that they did buy the parts from Mercedes, and nobody else was smart enough to buy them before the new rules came in, which said you can't buy those parts anymore, came in. But yeah, so it was worth it on that element, because they must have got a load of money for that, and it's just, made them a little bit more financially stable. But to be fair, they were always going to be with Lawrence Stroll, weren't they?
I mean, I guess you could also argue that had they not performed the way they did last season, they wouldn't have got Sebastian Vettel in their car. I mean, let's be fair. Before last season, if you'd have said that at the start of next season, Sebastian Vettel is going to be racing for Racing Point, now Aston Martin, obviously, you'd have gone, why? Like, he's a 4-time world champion. Why is he going to Racing Point? As in, not necessarily a financially brilliant team, not a team that you look at and go, yeah, in a couple of years' time they could have a contending car. I mean, it'll be interesting to see whether perhaps they really make the benefits in the next set of regulations. Perhaps they've kept resources back to kind of really kick off, as in the resources they would have gained from finishing well last year. Perhaps
they could
kind of
be
held that back.
They could be doing a Haas, but obviously the base levels for each is much different, so you don't notice how much they're doing a Haas this season. But,
and I mean, it's obviously worth considering as well that the regulations seem to have impacted, because they made a slight regulation change, didn't they? They seem to have impacted the Mercedes cars. When I say Mercedes themselves and the Aston Martin, because it was
the high rake cars. I don't know if having a Mercedes engine needs to do low rake rather. I don't know if whether having the Mercedes engine needs to be low rake, but as in just everyone who's got a Mercedes seems to be low rake.
Well, just purely from the point of view that Aston Martin's car last season was effectively a Mercedes of the season before. So if it's going to affect Mercedes this season, it's going to affect Aston Martin. So that is a factor. But as in, ultimately, like when you look at Mercedes, as in actual Mercedes, they seem to have not recovered all that pace, but they seem to have dealt with it a lot better than Aston Martin have. But then, I guess that's what happens when you buy parts in and you buy a concept rather than developing it yourself. Because you know how it works and how to resolve issues. So yeah, I think Aston Martin struggling a little bit. I think they're going to have to hope for a good season next season. Going on from this race then, we're in Hungary next. I don't know about you, I love Hungary as a circuit. I think it's brilliant. What are your thoughts after this race going into that next one? We haven't got any notes here really, so I guess it's just going to be
gut
bit off the
instinct.
cuff.
Well, to
Gut
be
instinct,
honest,
yeah.
Hungary has been described as Monaco without the streets. It's a very
narrow,
windy circuit. It does have a straight, so there is obviously that, which is different. But by and large, this is going to favour the cars that were good in Monaco, I think. Don't be surprised to see the Ferraris up there. Don't be surprised to see Red Bull properly drive away with it again. I was going to say, don't be surprised to see Aston Martin do something, but that was all strategy last time. Nothing else but that. So,
yeah, I mean,
if you were good in Monaco, you could be good in Hungary.
Do you think we could see some more fisticuffs?
Possibly. Turn 1 is almost a U-turn, and then you can drive somebody off the track quite easily. Obviously, you're not going to see it to the same extent because the collision in the British Grand Prix was on pretty much the fastest corner of the calendar even. So this is slower pace. You can still see the fisticuffs, and I think we have seen it so far, but so far it's only been in low speed corners or medium speed.
I feel like this is very much... I know this has been said so many times and it's very cliche, but I do think the gloves are off now.
Yeah.
To be honest, now, go on.
If Hamilton is involved in an incident... Well, I was going to say involved in an incident with Verstappen. If them two come together and Hamilton is the beneficiary again, I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of discussion as to is he being reckless, but is he being safe in a sense? Is he driving in a manner which is allowing the other person to do what they want to, or is he taking too many risks, but dangerous risks? Yeah, I'd just be interested to see if it happens again. I mean, if I was thinking of a corner, I don't know if you could do the track in your head, but I got turn 1, 2, 3, 4, turn 5. I don't know if you can do that in your head. No, the left-hander, the speedy one.
Oh yeah, after the chicane. Right, so you do the U-turn, you go straight, then you do the left-hander, right-hander, up the hill, a left, and then you've got that kind of sweeping right.
You do the U-turn, you got a left-hander, you got another left-hander, then a right-hander, then you're up the hill. Mm-hmm. At the top of that hill, I wouldn't be surprised to see two people go, because that, even though it's got an undulation, but that's a fast corner where if something's happening, someone could spin off.
That's one of those ones as well where, because of the way, like you said, because of the undulation, when you get to the top,
you don't know what's
there. It can be quite unstable, and then you've also got a lot of runoff as well. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be surprised.
I think there could be contact there.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to have been last season, from what I remember, there seems to be a lot of overtaking on that kind of after you've done the U-turn at the start, you kind of go down the hill a little bit and then you go left, don't you?
Yeah.
Around that kind of left turn, like drivers were very much finding different lines and different angles to kind of come at the corner. So I think that could be a strong overtaking position. But yeah, who knows? It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, the fact that it's straight after us, in terms of the Hamilton-Verstappen battle, I think perhaps if there'd been a couple of weeks break to kind of have it cool off and...
Is there 1 week break?
Yeah, we're straight into the next one now.
Oh, I thought there was a gap of at least a week.
Maybe there is. But do you know what? I may be lying there. Let me have a look. I think you may well be right.
I only know this because we raced together on the Formula 1, so I'm pretty clued in as to when they are. And I thought, there's a 14-day gap between them. Yeah, there is a week gap.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it'll still be fresh. But after that, it is the summer break, so there'll be a big gap between that race and the one after it, which would be a shame.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a shame. So what's after? I have interest. What's after that?
I haven't got a clue.
Oh my word! After that, it's like a month.
Yeah, well, it's the summer break, as I
But,
was saying.
but it
Belgium.
is Spa. That's not a
Yeah.
bad one to wait for.
Oh, to be fair, Spa, Zandvoort, Monza. Oh, what a tasty trio.
Tasty trio. And on that note, that brings us to the end of this podcast.
That's a triple header. Sorry, that is a triple header as well. Gosh, can't wait.
All the more reason to tune into the Down to the Wire podcast. I'm not sure what we'll talk about next week. Do you know what? I reckon, depending... Oh, saying that. Oh no, we could do a cheeky Lions one.
Yeah, I know you've hinted at it. I'm happy to do that.
Because, well, although saying
it is.
first
Yeah,
test
there's
would
nothing
be
else
again.
on.
But there isn't much else on. Just keep your eyes peeled. If you're a regular listener to the Down to the Wire podcast, thanks for listening, first of all. We do appreciate it. As usual, if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, why not follow and subscribe relative to the platform you're listening on. We're also on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Pocket Casts. Have I said Anchor? Maybe. I don't know. All of the usual ones.
If you just type it in, you'll find us.
If you find us, yeah, just look for the yellow shield. Jack, pleasure as always.
Gratias.
And we shall speak to you soon.